On May 11, 1989, Lloyd Daniels was fighting for his life in a hospital in Queens after being shot 3 times. He was 21 years old. Doctors had stabilized him, but his condition remained critical. When his old high school rival Dwayne Coswell entered the room, he expected to find the young man he had always known with a basketball nearby. Instead, Daniels was holding a Bible. Only a few years earlier, he had been called the finest New York City prospect since Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Jerry Tarkanian believed he possessed the gifts of Magic Johnson. Scouts described a 6'8" guard who could pass, score, rebound, and defend every position on a high school court. Yet Daniels had never played one NCAA game. No NBA team had drafted him. Several professional clubs had already sent him away. Now an argument over an $8 debt, according to police, appeared to have ended the basketball story before the NBA ever allowed it to begin. Then came November 7, 1992. 1,276 days after that night in Queens, Daniels stepped onto an NBA court in Denver for only the second game of his career. The San Antonio Spurs and Nuggets went through regulation, one overtime, and then another. Daniels stayed on the floor for 45 minutes. He scored 26 points. He grabbed 8 rebounds, delivered 6 assists, made 3 steals, and blocked 3 shots. No NCAA career had prepared him for that game. No draft selection had placed him there. Daniels had reached the NBA through failed schools, a college scandal, minor leagues, treatment programs, and the stubborn belief of people who kept opening doors long after the normal entrance had disappeared. And when the door finally opened, he looked as if he had always belonged behind it. That is the miracle of Lloyd Daniels. The tragedy is what basketball had to carry him through before the miracle was possible. How could the most wanted teenager in New York become a player no NBA team would touch, survive 3 shots, and then produce one of the most complete second games any rookie could imagine? The answer begins in East New York, where basketball discovered Swee'Pea long before any school understood the child carrying the name. Daniels was born in Brooklyn in September 1967. His mother died when he was 3, and his father largely disappeared from his life. Lloyd moved between a grandmother who worked long hours as a housekeeper and an aunt who already had 6 children of her own. There was love around him. There was no stable system. Sometimes his grandmother had to remain overnight at the homes where she worked. On those nights, another crowded apartment made room for Lloyd. He learned early that a home could change without warning and that the next day still expected him to find his own way. A basketball court gave him what the rest of his childhood could not. The lines stayed in place. A possession had a beginning and an end. If he saw an opening nobody else could see, the ball rewarded him immediately. The nickname came from Swee'Pea, the child in the Popeye cartoons. The resemblance made people smile. The game made the name travel across the city. By 15, Daniels was already playing against older competition and controlling games with a strange combination of size and imagination. He stood close to 6'8", but he did not move like a center. He brought the ball up the floor, changed direction without losing balance, and passed to spaces before teammates understood they were open. Howard Garfinkel would later rank him behind only Moses Malone among all the players he had seen at the famous 5-star camp. His judgment of Daniels as a passer was even simpler. You couldn't be a better passer than him. At the same time, Daniels was repeating the 8th grade. One administrator remembered that he attended only about half the time, and later reporting found that he missed 153 days in one school year and was still promoted. He entered special education, struggled badly with reading, and often disappeared before anyone could ask him to read a page. Daniels said some absences came from working weekends to help his grandmother and buy clothes. He was ashamed to arrive looking poor in front of other students. Others came from avoidance. Basketball made the difference almost irrelevant because another route always appeared. After Daniels was picked up as a truant, he arrived at Thomas Jefferson High School in Brooklyn. The coach did not even know who he was. The students did. Word moved through the building before Daniels reached the gym. Lloyd Daniels was here. The coach remembered the reaction as if King Tut had entered the school. Thomas Jefferson had received a celebrity before it had taught him a class. High school coaches wanted him, and so did the Gauchos in Riverside, two powerful New York amateur programs. A few friends played for the Gauchos. Soon, Daniels had their jacket, bag, and cap, then traveled with them to tournaments in Las Vegas, Florida, California, and Hawaii. One teacher advised him to avoid outside leagues because an injury could cost him his school season. Within a week, Daniels injured his ankle in another game. For once, the injury forced basketball to stop. A home instructor visited him every day. Daniels liked the arrangement: one adult, one room, no public embarrassment. He said he could communicate better that way. Then his ankle healed. He returned for the end of the season, scored 44 points across 3 games, and walked into an educator's office carrying a letter from Syracuse coach Jim Boeheim. Daniels was glowing. A major college already knew his name. He could not read what the college had written to him. The letter exposed the absurdity. College coaches were recruiting a teenager who could not read their invitations. Nobody stopped. Westinghouse tried to pull him in. A teacher there took him to an amusement park and a Philadelphia 76ers game. Riverside offered another connection, and the Gauchos fought to keep theirs. Oak Hill Academy in the mountains of Virginia became the next solution. It was a strict boarding school far from New York, with classes and basketball under the same supervision. One benefactor paid the tuition and even flew Daniels' grandmother and uncle there to see the campus. Oak Hill tested him. The results showed reading skills near the 2nd grade level and language skills below 3rd grade. Daniels remembered the humiliation, but rejected the idea that he lacked intelligence. "I'm not dumb, I'm just a guy who ain't go to class." Oak Hill supplied clothes, tutoring, and rules. Within weeks, coaches were dealing with skipped effort, conflicts, and open resistance. During one practice, Coach Larry Davis confronted him for refusing instructions. Daniels walked out. Davis offered to arrange the trip home. Another school was already waiting. Laurinburg Institute in North Carolina had experience with academically troubled athletes. Daniels arrived with the reputation of a basketball king. The school told him the crown was worthless without basic work. He averaged 24 points. More importantly, he began passing English, algebra, biology, history, and reading. For a moment, the move appeared to be working. The teenager who could not read the Syracuse letter was attending class and collecting credits. Then he left. Daniels disliked the environment, the distance, and even the cafeteria. He returned to New York and discussed the next move with the same adults who had arranged the previous ones. Oak Hill accepted him again, proving that even after walking away, Daniels remained talented enough to reopen a closed door. The second stay ended after a dispute involving a teammate's watch. Daniels denied taking it. Oak Hill asked him to leave, and the problem returned to New York with him. The city assigned Daniels to Andrew Jackson High School in Queens, the defending city champion. A private tutor was hired. Another private school in Florida offered to pay for everything. Daniels rejected that option and stayed in New York. At Andrew Jackson, all the scattered pieces of the basketball player finally appeared in the same season. Daniels averaged 31.2 points, 12.3 rebounds, and 10 assists as a junior. He could defend near the basket, run the offense, and decide whether a possession ended with his shot or somebody else's. Against high school competition, there was no correct matchup. One tournament game showed why the numbers did not feel inflated. Daniels scored 36 points, pulled down 17 rebounds, and still finished with double-digit assists. Most high school stars could dominate one column of a box score. Daniels could lead the break, make the first pass, continue through the lane, collect the miss, and guard the largest opponent at the other end. If the defense forced the ball out of his hands, he had already decided where it should go next. Put a guard on him, and Daniels played over the top. Put a forward on him, and he became the point guard. Send 2 defenders, and the pass arrived before the trap. At the 5-star camp, local stars could no longer live on the reputation they carried from home. The week was built around drills, instruction, and repeated games against players who had dominated their own cities. College coaches watched to see which famous teenager would become ordinary when everyone on the floor was famous. Daniels did not become ordinary. He rebounded like a forward, advanced the ball like a guard, and delivered passes before the defense saw an opening. Camp director Howard Garfinkel had evaluated hundreds of future college and NBA players. He watched Daniels control the week and named him the outstanding player. Now the stories from New York had national witnesses. The comparisons became reckless because the performances invited recklessness. Some called him the best schoolboy New York had produced since Lou Alcindor became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. His size and passing brought Magic Johnson into the conversation. His shooting touch made people mention Larry Bird. Tarkanian went further. He's the best I've ever been around. Nobody's close to him. Tarkanian had built national contenders and evaluated elite players for years. He believed Daniels could become the greatest player in UNLV history. But while the basketball reputation went national, Daniels remained 18 years old in the 11th grade and far from ordinary college eligibility. Agents began telling him to forget school and turn professional. Daniels quit Andrew Jackson before receiving a diploma. Representatives approached Daniels about signing papers and going directly into professional basketball. One supporter even heard claims that he could already help the Houston Rockets. It was an attractive fantasy with no safe route behind it. Daniels could not walk from an unfinished junior year into a protected NBA career, and Europe would send him into another country with even less structure. Daniels continued appearing in major basketball events. In one high school all-star game, he scored 24 points while helping hold Sean Higgins to 8. Higgins would later contribute to Michigan's national championship. Daniels still looked like the player moving toward the brighter future. Higgins had a school, then a college program, and then the NBA draft. Daniels had comparisons, no diploma, and no normal road to college. Daniels wanted UNLV. He had visited Las Vegas with the Gauchos and loved the environment. Tarkanian wanted the 6'8" creator who could turn a great program into something opponents had never seen. The rules said Daniels had no diploma, no equivalency certificate, and no realistic path through the usual admissions process. Proposition 48 created another academic barrier. On paper, the recruitment should have ended. UNLV began constructing a road around the paper. Nevada rules allowed Daniels to collect temporary university credits without formal admission. If he reached 14 with passing grades, he could enter as a regular student and begin the NCAA waiting period. The university was building a private road around one recruit. Daniels signed a letter of intent in April 1986. A supporter paid for the flight to Las Vegas and arranged an apartment. Daniels entered continuing education and took summer classes, many focused on reading. The next obstacle was full-time college work. He enrolled at Mount San Antonio College in California, earned 14 credits, and appeared in only 2 basketball games. In one, he scored 30 points and grabbed 16 rebounds. Then his private reading sessions conflicted with practice. The basketball arrangement ended, but the reading continued, and the credits moved him closer to UNLV. Mark Warkentien, the university's recruiting coordinator, and his wife helped Daniels read. A court eventually appointed Warkentien as Daniels' special legal guardian. Think about that. A UNLV recruiting coordinator had become the legal guardian of the recruit he was helping bring to Las Vegas. Questions about rent, transportation, and other assistance followed Daniels before he ever reached a practice. Daniels enrolled full-time at UNLV in January 1987. He worked with a tutor every day. He said his reading was improving. He talked about studying computers and opening a store. If he completed the required academic year, he could finally become eligible for basketball. Tarkanian began imagining the offense. Give Daniels the ball. Move everyone else. Let the biggest guard in the building solve the defense. For a few weeks, the impossible plan survived. Then, on February 9th, Daniels knocked on the door of a house in North Las Vegas. An undercover officer answered. According to the police report, Daniels attempted to buy $20 worth of an illegal substance. He was arrested and taken away while local television recorded the scene. Daniels initially said he had gone there to collect basketball tickets. He later entered a guilty plea to a reduced charge. The most elaborate eligibility rescue in college basketball collapsed at a front door. Within roughly 15 hours, a local attorney and UNLV supporter offered to represent Daniels without charge, while others helped with immediate expenses. Lloyd had made the decision. Basketball people again moved to contain the damage. Tarkanian immediately announced that Daniels would never play for UNLV. One day later, the coach backed away from his own word. Never had always been difficult to say around Lloyd Daniels. He entered a court-ordered treatment program, then violated its conditions. The recruitment controversy widened. Allegations involving benefits, guardianship, and influential supporters became part of a larger NCAA case against UNLV. The recruit Tarkanian dreamed about never attended one UNLV practice as a player. By the next season, Daniels had no diploma, no NCAA experience, and no organized development plan, yet he was still one of the most talented young players in America. The Topeka Sizzlers of the Continental Basketball Association signed him for the 1987-88 season. The CBA was not a protected campus. It was filled with grown professionals fighting for NBA attention, smaller salaries, and one more month of employment. Daniels averaged roughly 16 points across 29 games. The flashes remained. So did the instability. When he failed to follow the requirements of his treatment program, Topeka suspended him. New Zealand offered distance from Las Vegas, New York, and every previous headline. That opportunity ended within weeks after the team concluded that his off-court habits had become impossible to manage. The farther Daniels traveled, the smaller the leagues became. In June 1988, he entered the NBA draft. Every team knew the legend. Every team also knew the schools, the arrest, the suspensions, and the professional organizations that had already stopped believing they could control the risk. No one selected him. 75 names were called in that draft. Lloyd Daniels was not one of them. The league already knew he could play. It did not believe he would remain available long enough to justify the risk, so teams selected players with less size, less imagination, and a much more ordinary history. For the first time since childhood, the supply of famous programs had run out. He had moved from New York's next basketball king to an undrafted player without a stable team in less than 3 years. Then came the sidewalk outside his grandmother's home in Queens. At approximately 2:10 in the morning on May 11, 1989, an argument ended with Daniels being shot 3 times. Police connected the confrontation to an $8 debt. Daniels was rushed to a hospital in critical condition. By sunrise, basketball no longer mattered. One of the most gifted young players New York had produced was 21 years old, undrafted, and suddenly fighting for a future that no longer had anything to do with basketball. Lou Dalmeida, one of the men who had spent years arranging schools and opportunities, identified the bargain more clearly than anyone else. Certain things were overlooked because of his talent. The sentence explained the bargain. Daniels made the decisions. His talent made almost every consequence negotiable. Another school, another benefactor, another team, another promise that this arrangement would be different. Now the price could not be moved to another city or another season. Daniels survived. The newspapers had their perfect ending. The fallen prodigy had reached the bottom, opened his eyes, and received a second life. Real life refused to become that simple. Daniels recovered enough to play again. The patterns that had derailed him did not disappear in the hospital. Teams remembered every failure, even when newspapers preferred the cleaner story of a changed man. Quad City gave him 4 games and released him. Albany invited him to training camp and cut him on the final day. Even after nearly losing his life, the player who once seemed inevitable remained outside the NBA and barely inside professional basketball. George Karl was coaching Albany. He watched Daniels move through camp and saw a fraction of the athlete New York had described. Another player who knew the old Swee'Pea told Karl that the man in front of them represented perhaps 10% of what he had been. Karl did something most basketball adults had refused to do. He stopped discussing basketball. Forget about basketball and get your life in order. For years, the formula had always run the other way. Find Lloyd a team, and the team will create structure. Find him a famous coach, and the coach will create responsibility. Give him minutes, and the game will give him a reason to change. Karl reversed the order. The player could wait. The man could not. Daniels eventually entered the Houston program operated by former NBA star John Lucas. Nobody had to explain to Lucas how elite talent could coexist with a collapsing life. His own career had taken him through repeated suspensions, denial, and recovery. He had turned that experience into treatment centers and an aftercare program for athletes. Lucas did not sell Daniels another dramatic rescue. He gave him repetition, training, counseling, accountability, another morning, another practice, another evening in which the correct decision mattered more than a brilliant pass. Daniels had spent his youth learning that basketball could purchase exceptions. Lucas built a system in which basketball became part of the work, not payment for escaping it. The change was difficult to see because it did not arrive as one cinematic moment. It appeared in smaller jobs that lasted longer than the jobs before them. Daniels joined the Miami Tropics in the United States Basketball League, a team Lucas used as an extension of his program. The gym gave recovering athletes a place to compete, but the roster was not a hiding place. If Daniels wanted another career, he had to begin below the NBA and remain dependable after the scouts went home. The next stop was Greensboro, North Carolina. The City Gators played in the new Global Basketball Association. Their practice court sat on the second floor of a YMCA. The NBA was only a short drive away in Charlotte, but Daniels was still separated from it by years of suspicion. Atlanta and Milwaukee considered inviting him to training camp in 1991. Both possibilities disappeared. Another player might have treated Greensboro as an insult. Daniels stayed. Coach Ed McClain deliberately avoided studying every old headline before making his judgment. After working with Daniels, he offered a verdict nobody had been able to give for years. I haven't had 1 minute's problem with him. Daniels was often the last player to leave practice. One day, after the formal work ended, he kept an assistant coach on the floor for a one-on-one game. There were no television cameras, no college recruiters, and no guarantee that an NBA executive would care. He kept playing anyway. It's just great being out there on the court again. He began the season around 22 points per game, then raised his production. By the end of his Greensboro run, Daniels averaged 24.3 points and won the league's Most Valuable Player award. The old descriptions were becoming evidence again, but the NBA still waited. Daniels moved to the Long Island Surf. He averaged 23.7 points, 6 rebounds, and nearly 8 assists. His size still overwhelmed smaller guards. His passing still made teammates better. His work no longer disappeared after one promising month. On June 29, 1992, Daniels played his final game for Long Island before leaving for an NBA tryout. He scored 27 points. He collected 12 rebounds. He delivered 19 assists. 19 assists from a 6'8" guard who had never played NCAA basketball. The performance was more than a minor league explosion. It was a reminder that every warning in Daniels' life had existed beside a basketball gift that refused to become ordinary. Now the coach who had imagined that gift at UNLV was waiting in San Antonio. Jerry Tarkanian had become head coach of the Spurs. His roster included David Robinson, one of the league's premier centers, but San Antonio needed creation on the perimeter. 5 years earlier, Tarkanian had lost Daniels before coaching him for a single practice. He now had an NBA roster and one final way to discover whether the dream had been real. Daniels entered the summer program without a draft pedigree or guaranteed position. He was 24, married, a father, and coming from the longest stable stretch of basketball he had produced as an adult. Tarkanian saw enough. On July 21, 1992, the Spurs signed Lloyd Daniels to a 2-year contract. The agreement came with strict conditions. Contemporary reporting said Daniels would be tested twice each week. The NBA door had opened, but the organization was not pretending the danger had vanished. Reporters called the contract another chance. Daniels rejected the word. "I don't believe in chances. This is life." Daniels had spent years moving between adults who believed they possessed the next solution. San Antonio could provide a contract, Tarkanian could create minutes, and Lucas could impose rules. None of them could make the ordinary decisions that continued after the comeback story stopped attracting attention. The first Spurs practices produced confusion before they produced belief. Avery Johnson looked at Daniels and wondered why everyone was excited. Daniels did not possess the sculpted appearance of Terry Cummings or the explosive image associated with Michael Jordan and Dominique Wilkins. Years outside elite development had left marks that a warm-up could not hide. Then the scrimmage began. Daniels changed the game. He handled the ball at 6'8", created passes across the defense, and scored without asking the offense for permission. Johnson's conclusion required 6 words. "This guy can flat-out play." David Robinson felt it too. He saw a player capable of improvising at NBA speed, a large guard whose next decision remained invisible until the ball had already arrived. This was no longer Tarkanian defending an old mistake. NBA players were discovering the legend for themselves. On November 6, 1992, Daniels made his NBA debut in Sacramento. 6 points were useful. 5 fouls in 24 minutes showed how much NBA basketball he still had to learn. One night later, the Spurs played in Denver. Regulation ended without a winner. The first overtime did the same. Tarkanian kept Daniels on the floor as the minutes climbed and the altitude attacked both TMs. Daniels shot 11 of 19 and scored 26 points. He added 8 rebounds, 6 assists, 3 steals, and 3 blocks in 45 minutes. Look at the line closely. This was not one lucky shooting night. Daniels scored over NBA defenders, rebounded through their size, recovered the vision people had compared to Magic, and protected the rim like a forward. In only his second NBA game, Lloyd Daniels affected every part of the floor. After one night in Denver, nobody in the Spurs locker room needed Tarkanian to explain why he had chased Lloyd Daniels for 5 years. The player New York remembered was still there. The performance also made the lost years impossible to ignore. Daniels could do this now, at 25, after almost no high-level organized development. What might he have become if the student and the player had advanced together? That question could have carried Tarkanian through an entire season. He lasted only 6 more weeks. The Spurs began 9-11. Tarkanian clashed with management, declared the situation nearly impossible, and was fired after 20 games. Daniels had reached the NBA through the coach who had believed in him when every league closed its door. Before Christmas, that coach was gone. The replacement was John Lucas. The man who had helped Daniels reconstruct his life now controlled his NBA minutes. Tarkanian had opened the door through loyalty. Lucas intended to keep Daniels inside through demands. Lucas separated the relationships clearly. Away from the game, he could be a counselor and friend. During the game, he was the coach. He owed Daniels nothing. Then Lucas delivered a prediction nearly as provocative as Tarkanian's old comparison. Lloyd can be an all-star, but he's got to be taught right. The second half of the sentence mattered more than the first. Lucas demanded defense. He demanded fewer mistakes. He demanded that Daniels accept instruction even when instinct had carried him somewhere else. Talent got him into the discussion. Lucas wanted the rest. Under Lucas, San Antonio won 12 of its first 14 games. The new coach gave more ownership to David Robinson and the players, but ownership came with accountability. Daniels could not survive as a protected project inside a team trying to win immediately. He responded well enough to build a real rookie season. Daniels appeared in 77 games and started 10. He averaged 9.1 points in just over 20 minutes, shot 44.3% from the field, and made 59 three-pointers. He was not a ceremonial survivor sitting at the end of the bench. For most of the year, he was a dependable NBA rotation player. Those numbers did not fulfill the prophecy. They defeated the obituary. The public treats potential like a debt. If a teenager is compared to Magic Johnson, 9 points per game becomes evidence of failure. But the teenager in those comparisons had repeated 8th grade, moved through 4 high schools, left without a diploma, lost college before playing, gone undrafted, been dismissed by teams, and survived an attack outside his grandmother's home. 9 points could never equal Magic. They could still represent one of the most improbable rookie seasons of the era. The problem was that survival and development were not the same achievement. Daniels saw passing angles that could not be taught. He used his height to shoot over guards and understood the emotional rhythm of a game. He also entered the NBA without years of defensive positioning, scouting discipline, conditioning, and role acceptance that less gifted players had been forced to learn. The NBA is where natural advantages become ordinary. Every roster contains former stars. Minutes belong to the players who repeat the correct decision when the offense is not built around them. Daniels had spent much of his youth being moved whenever a structure failed. Now the structure was the league. It was not moving for him. Robinson later explained the disappointment directly. He needed to be more open to teaching and more open to whatever we needed. That criticism mattered because Robinson also cared about him. People around the Spurs remembered the relationship almost like an older brother protecting a younger one. The frustration did not come from discovering that Daniels lacked talent. It came from seeing how much talent remained and how difficult it was to convert into reliable NBA basketball. During his second Spurs season, Daniels played 65 games but averaged only 5.7 points. His shooting fell. His role narrowed. The player who had once controlled every high school possession now had to remain useful while the offense moved through someone else. San Antonio waived him before the 1994-95 season. The Spurs had given him 2 years. By October 1994, they were done waiting. Philadelphia brought him in under John Lucas, but familiarity could not manufacture a role. Daniels appeared in 5 games, was released, and went back to the CBA. The moment he dropped below the NBA, the star reappeared. With the Fort Wayne Fury, Daniels averaged 27.4 points and 7.4 assists. He was the only player in the league's top 10 in both categories. Against that level, the size, passing, and one-on-one scoring could still take over an entire night. He was too good for the basketball world below the NBA. The NBA was no longer calling to ask what he might become. It called when somebody got hurt. In February 1995, the Los Angeles Lakers were missing Cedric Ceballos and Eddie Jones. They needed a body immediately, and Daniels was scoring more than anyone available in the CBA. Atlanta was interested too, but Los Angeles offered the clearer chance to play at small forward. Daniels accepted a 10-day contract and joined the Lakers on the day they faced Philadelphia, the team that had just released him. A 10-day player enters the building with almost no control. He does not know the offense. He does not know where he will be living next month, and every missed assignment gives the team an easy reason to send him away. Daniels had spent his career surviving unstable situations he had helped create. This time, instability came with the job. He earned another 10 days, then a contract for the rest of the season. Injuries gave him minutes, but they did not give him what happened on March 13th against Indiana. The Lakers fell behind by 17 points in the first quarter. Daniels stayed on the floor for 32 minutes and made 9 of 15 shots. He hit 3 times from long range, added 2 steals, and finished with a game-high 22 points. With 16 seconds left, Vlade Divac missed a free throw after pulling the Lakers within 1. Daniels started on the right side of the lane, slipped around Rick Smits, Derek McKee, and Antonio Davis, grabbed the offensive rebound, and twisted back toward the glass. He scored through contact, then made the free throw that gave Los Angeles a 93-91 lead with 12.9 seconds remaining. Less than 6 years earlier, Daniels had been fighting for his life in Queens. In the 1988 NBA draft, 75 names had been called, and his was not one of them. Now a player hired for 10 days had just won a game for the Lakers. That should have been the beginning of a secure role. It lasted less than a month. On April 11th, the Lakers waived Daniels before the playoffs. He had contributed more than expected, started 14 games, and averaged 7.4 points, but the emergency was over. The team kept moving. Italy offered a larger role, and Daniels averaged more than 23 points for Scavolini-Pissarro. Sacramento called when an injury opened another temporary spot, then released him after 5 games. New Jersey gave him 17 games. Toronto gave him 6 more in 1998. By then, every call meant the same thing. A team needed help now, but nobody was building around his future. 6 NBA teams employed Daniels across 5 seasons. He appeared in 200 regular season games, made 29 starts, and scored 1,411 points. The totals are modest enough to disappear on a statistics page. The route to them is almost impossible to believe. Daniels continued playing in smaller leagues and overseas after his final NBA game. Basketball carried him through more cities, more countries, and more temporary homes. The child who could not stay inside one school somehow created an adult profession out of constant movement. It never became the career Tarkanian imagined in the middle of the night. It also never became the ending New York expected in 1989. Years later, filmmaker Benjamin May began trying to tell Daniels' story. Trust did not arrive quickly. Too many people had approached Swee'Pea because the old legend still had value, and too many adults in his youth had offered help while also calculating what the basketball player might become. Daniels eventually agreed. The film brought him back to the West 4th Street courts in New York, near the place where the documentary premiered. People approached him with memories of passes, games, and playground moments that had never entered an official box score. Decades had passed, but Swee'Pea still belonged to the city. May interviewed Tarkanian, Lucas, Robinson, Avery Johnson, and others who had dealt with Daniels at close range. They remembered missed practices, resisted coaching, impossible passes, and opportunities that did not last. Yet the filmmaker kept hearing some version of the same sentence. "I love Lloyd." They knew exactly how exhausting he could be. They loved him anyway. Robinson had treated him like a younger brother. Lucas had been counselor and coach. Tarkanian had risked part of his college program and later part of his NBA job because he could never quite abandon the player he thought Daniels might become. By then, Daniels was working as a youth basketball coach in New Jersey. He spoke about making sure his own children did not repeat his educational chaos. He had also hired a private tutor for himself because he wanted to read as well as they could. When Daniels was young, adults kept changing schools to preserve the basketball career. As a father, he understood that the education had to remain even if the game disappeared. The question everyone still wanted to ask was the one he resisted. What if? What if he had stayed at Laurenburg? What if the UNLV plan had survived? What if Tarkanian had coached him at 19 instead of 25, before years outside organized basketball had turned basic professional habits into a daily fight? Daniels knew the imaginary career could grow forever until it covered the man who had actually lived. "I don't look backwards, man." The record leaves a hard verdict. Adults taught Daniels that talent could postpone consequences. He kept using that lesson long after he was old enough to know better. Schools, coaches, and benefactors made their choices. So did Lloyd, only he had to live with all of them. On May 11, 1989, Lloyd Daniels appeared to have reached the end before playing 1 NBA minute. On November 7, 1992, he scored 26 points in his second NBA game. That performance did not return the lost years. It did not turn 9 NBA points per game into Magic Johnson, and it did not erase the choices that followed. It proved that the legend had contained something real, and that, after every normal road had vanished, Daniels could still reach the league on work performed far from the attention that once followed him everywhere. He played 200 NBA games after 75 names were selected ahead of him. He raised a family, traveled the world, and eventually taught children the game that had once carried him faster than the rest of his life could follow. Near the end of the documentary, Daniels reduced all of it to one truth. It ain't about basketball, it's about life. People called him magic with a jump shot. That was the future basketball wanted from Lloyd Daniels. The man himself accomplished something less glamorous and more difficult. He stayed alive long enough to become more than the prediction.